April 8th, 1945. 5 miles northwest of Weimar, Germany. Inside the barbed wire perimeter of Buchenwald concentration camp, the air is thick with fear and smoke. Somewhere between the barracks and the watchtowers, a small group of prisoners gathers around a crude shortwave transmitter powered by a fragile generator. Their hands tremble, not from weakness alone, but from the knowledge that this may be their final act of defiance. In rapid Morse code, a message cuts through the static of war. A plea sent into the darkness. A warning, an admission of impending destruction. The SS are preparing to erase the camp, and everyone inside it. 3 minutes later, a reply arrives from the advancing American forces. It is brief, it is calm, it is decisive. Hold out. Help is coming. Within days. U.S. armored units will breach the gates and confront evidence so disturbing that even seasoned soldiers will struggle to comprehend it. Yet hidden among the survivors, the crematoria, and the silence of the dead is the shadow of a man whose ordinary life concealed extraordinary cruelty. His name was Wilhelm Scha fer. Wilhelm Schäfer was born on October 20th, 1911, in the small village of Obhausen, then part of the German Empire. It was a quiet rural community shaped by hard labor, rigid social order, and deep resentment toward political change. Schäfer grew up in a household where authority was revered and dissent was despised. His father, a devoted supporter of nationalist forces, spoke often of betrayal, weakness, and enemies within. These ideas were absorbed long before Wilhelm understood their consequences. As a young man, Schäfer trained as a bricklayer at a local workshop. The work was physical, repetitive, and offered little sense of purpose. When his apprenticeship ended, unemployment followed. He drifted between short-term labor and farm work, never integrating into the politically active working-class movements that emerged across Germany. Trade unions, left-wing organizers, and social democrats were not companions to him, but threats. Schäfer's isolation hardened into hostility. He saw cooperation as submission and solidarity as deception. While others sought collective solutions to economic despair, he embraced discipline and hierarchy. There was nothing remarkable about him, no academic ambition, no leadership talent, only a quiet readiness to obey orders and to direct blame outward. In a country collapsing under crisis, this disposition would soon find its reward. By the early 1930s, Germany was unraveling. Hyperinflation, mass unemployment, and political violence had eroded trust in democratic institutions. For men like Wilhelm Schäfer, this chaos did not inspire doubt, but longing for order, for certainty, for a force that promised to restore meaning to an unstable world. Fascism arrived at precisely that moment, offering simple answers to complex failures. Adolf Hitler and the National Socialist movement spoke directly to Schäfer's grievances. They blamed Germany's humiliation on internal enemies, glorified obedience, and redefined violence as a patriotic duty. Schäfer did not study ideology in depth, nor did he question its contradictions. What mattered was belonging. The Nazi Party offered structure, recognition, and a clear hierarchy in which loyalty was rewarded. In 1932, Schäfer formally joined the Nazi Party. Soon after, he volunteered for the SS, not as a conscript, but by choice. The black uniform represented more than authority. It signaled moral exemption. Within the SS, brutality was not a flaw, but a qualification. Schäfer embraced this transformation quickly. He participated in street marches, intimidated opponents, and took part in assaults against political adversaries. When Hitler was appointed Chancellor in January 1933, Schäfer interpreted it as validation. Violence became policy, hatred became duty, and obedience became a path upward. What had once been personal resentment was now backed by the full machinery of the state. When the Nazi state consolidated power, Wilhelm Schäfer was no longer an obscure party member. He had become an instrument. Between 1935 and 1937, he was assigned to Lichtenberg concentration camp, one of the regime's early laboratories of repression. There, brutality was not improvised, it was rehearsed. Prisoners learned quickly that discipline meant survival and that the guards measured authority through pain. Schäfer absorbed these lessons with unsettling ease. Abuse, intimidation, and killings were not aberrations but daily routines that hardened him further. In 1937, Schäfer was transferred to the newly established Buchenwald concentration camp. Operating under a command structure defined by cruelty and impunity, the camp sat on a wooded hill overlooking Weimar, a city long associated with German culture and humanism. Inside the electrified fences, that heritage meant nothing. Watchtowers ringed the perimeter. Automatic weapons pointed inward. Order was maintained not by rules, but by fear. Buchenwald's population expanded rapidly. Political prisoners arrived first, followed by Jews, Jehovah's Witnesses, Sinti and Roma, repeat offenders, deserters, and prisoners of war. Schäfer served as a barracks supervisor and deputy commandant of the camp laundry area, positions that placed him in daily contact with inmates' lives and deaths. He was also assigned to Commando 99, a unit tasked with executions. The work was systematic, concealed, and efficient. One facility in particular defined this system. In a former horse stable, the SS constructed what appeared to be a medical examination room. Prisoners transported from other camps were told they would undergo routine checks. They were lined up against a wall fitted with a measuring device. As each man stepped forward, his height was recorded. Then, through a small opening hidden behind the apparatus, a shot was fired into the back of his neck. The floor was painted brown to mask what followed. These deaths were never logged. No names were recorded. It is estimated that thousands were killed there. Schäfer was not a distant overseer. Witnesses later described his presence as deliberate and calm. He participated directly in executions, often volunteering. His actions were not driven by rage but by familiarity. Violence had become procedural. Soviet prisoners of war were frequent targets, selected not for individual acts, but for what they represented within Nazi racial ideology. Punishment extended beyond executions. Schäfer was known for severe floggings, administered publicly to enforce submission. Another method, known among prisoners as tree hanging, involved suspending victims by their bound arms from hooks, leaving them dangling, unable to stand. The pain was prolonged. The message was unmistakable. These acts were meant to be seen, to circulate fear faster than orders ever could. From 1943 onward, Schäfer was also associated with the Waffen-SS, serving in a unit deployed in Estonia. There, the same patterns repeated under the guise of anti-partisan operations. Villages suspected of aiding resistance were destroyed. Civilians were arrested, interrogated, and executed. Prisoners of war were treated as expendable. The front lines shifted, but the methods remained unchanged. Back at Buchenwald, conditions deteriorated as the war turned against Germany. Food supplies dwindled. Disease spread. Transports increased. By the time Allied forces approached in April 1945, the camp held tens of thousands of prisoners in extreme physical decline. As evacuation orders loomed, inmates feared they would be marched to death or eliminated on sight. On April 8th, prisoners transmitted a secret message to the advancing American army. It was a gamble against time. 3 days later, U.S. armored units entered Buchenwald. They encountered scenes that defied comprehension. Emaciated survivors, the remains of the dead, and evidence of a system built for systematic destruction. Schäfer was not there to be captured. he had already begun to disappear. As the Third Reich collapsed, Wilhelm Schäfer moved with urgency, not defiance. He understood what defeat meant for men like him. The symbols of authority that had once protected him now marked him for judgment. Schäfer removed his SS blood group tattoo, destroyed his papers, and discarded his uniform. His disappearance was methodical, not panicked. Survival, not loyalty, guided his final wartime decisions. He fled first to the district of Querfurt, then to Weimar, blending into the waves of displaced civilians flooding post-war Germany. Eventually, he settled in a small farming community in the Arnstadt district, an area that would soon fall under Soviet control and become part of East Germany. Schäfer avoided West Germany, despite his wife living there, fearing recognition among former prisoners or Allied authorities. In his new surroundings, Schäfer reinvented himself. He became a local agricultural worker, later rising to the position of chairman of the Peasants' Mutual Aid Association. To neighbors, he appeared disciplined, outspoken, and principled. Few suspected that this respected figure had once enforced terror behind electrified fences. For nearly 15 years, Schäfer lived unchallenged. The past remained buried until it returned through an unexpected encounter. In 1960, during disputes over agricultural collectivization, a government representative visited Schäfer's home. The man was a former Buchenwald prisoner. He recognized Schäfer immediately. The report reached the Stasi within hours. This time, Schäfer could not erase his identity. Wilhelm Schäfer was arrested after months of investigation. In 1961, his case was brought before the Supreme Court of East Germany, a rare move reserved for crimes of exceptional gravity. Former prisoners were transported from across Europe to testify. They spoke not with exaggeration, but with restraint, describing a man whose presence alone instilled fear, whose violence required no provocation. Schäfer admitted to participating in executions, attempting to minimize his role, but the record was already complete. The court found him responsible for hundreds of deaths at Lichtenberg and Buchenwald, and for further killings during anti-partisan operations in Estonia. The verdict was final. There would be no appeal, no commutation. On June 16, 1961, Schäfer was executed by guillotine. His body was cremated and buried in an unmarked grave. Buchenwald remains. The barracks, the fences, the crematorium stand as evidence. Schäfer left no legacy of ideas or achievement. Only proof of how ordinary obedience can become systematic destruction. When morality is surrendered to power, history does not end with liberation or verdicts. It endures in memory, in evidence, and in the responsibility to confront what occurred. The story of Wilhelm Schäfer is not about one man alone, but about systems that reward cruelty and the cost of silence. If you value documented history told without distortion, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and continue exploring the past with world history.